Okay, I'd like to formally begin by thanking Brian for restarting the program. We've had a bit of a hiatus for a few months, but with Brian's hard work, we've got a restored program with an excellent series of speakers, starting with Matthijs today. So you're very welcome to come, and this will be an ongoing process. I'll talk later about a few other things about the club and so on. I want to welcome Matthijs van Veelen from the University of the Netherlands to the University of Amsterdam, isn't it? Correct?
Yeah.
To speak on the evolution of good and evil. It's a very Christmassy theme when we think about doing good to others and all the rest of it. It's wonderful to have you, Matthijs. We very much look forward to your talk. Quick reminder, keep your cameras off and your microphone off unless you're asked to speak. If you want to speak, raise your hand. That's the icon hand in the system. You can see at the top there's an icon which says raise. That's to raise a hand. I'll be able to see that and hopefully call you in order when that happens. So welcome, Matthijs. We're very much looking forward to your talk. Thank you for coming.
Yeah, I'm very happy to be here. So coincidentally, a while ago, I stumbled upon this and I saw, I think his name was Kevin Mitchell, talk about the evolution of free will. And I found it a fantastic talk. And then, I don't know, half a year later, I got an invitation. So I'm super happy to be here, part of this series. Also, in preparation, in preparing for this, I listened to myself talk at a previous presentation of this, and oh man, this was precise and slow, and I hope that I can present as well as I did earlier. But either way, okay. So the topic is a question that many of us are interested in, and that is why humans are moral. And I would like to begin by saying that I'll not be, at least not at the beginning, be very precise about what we mean by that. So it's also fine to think of why we're cooperative or altruistic or pro-social. So especially at the beginning, I won't be precise about that, and I don't need to. It's, it's good behavior, and we ask ourselves, why does it exist? What I do want to reflect on a little bit is, so part of what I present was accompanied by a blog post that I wrote, and that started with the fact that there are literally thousands of papers that all have the same introduction. The introduction being, human cooperation is a mystery, it's an enduring conundrum, and this paper is about that. And what's a little bit surprising is that every next paper still has the same introduction. It's still a mystery, and apparently it's still not solved. And on my Google Scholar feed, every few days, there's a new paper appearing with that same introduction. So a good question is, why are we not getting closer to the answer? Or are we doing something wrong? And one of the things that I'm hoping to convince you of is that yes, we're doing something wrong. We are in love with certain games and certain techniques so much so that we sometimes stop being scientific. And maybe at the very end I can reflect on this a little bit. So what I'm saying is we love prisoners' dilemmas for a good reason. It's a fantastic game to capture the tension between individual and collective interests. If that is the game that you're focused on, then it's natural to also focus on two specific mechanisms. One of them is population structure, and population structure can be a host of things. It can be group structure, so it can be that individuals live in groups with which they sometimes have between group competition. It can be super stylized. There's many papers about very stylized population structures, such as the cycle. And we'll get back to this in a bit, where you have cooperators and defectors, and they interact with their neighbors. You also have many papers about network structures. And what all of those population structures have in common is that if you reproduce locally, then you are related to those that are close to you on the network or on the cycle, or that are in the same group. And that induces kin selection. It means that the people that you're interacting with, or the individuals that you're interacting with, are not just a random sample from the population. And the most famous rule from kin selection is Hamilton's rule. So I'm assuming in this audience everybody knows what Hamilton's rule is, but the idea here is that for social behavior to evolve, you have to compare the benefits to the recipient with a cost to the donor, and the benefits to the recipient you have to weigh by the relatedness between the two, and if that is larger than the cost, then cooperation is going to evolve. Now, one thing, it's a detail that I try always to also include if I talk about this. It's not in The Selfish Gene. I'm assuming that's a relatively well-known book, but The Selfish Gene was written in 1976, I think, and the cancellation effect is discovered much later. But it's a really nice deepening of our understanding of kin selection, in the sense that in the 90s, D.S. Wilson and two co-authors discovered that it's not enough to be related to others for cooperation to evolve, but what you really need is a discrepancy between the relatedness between those that interact and those that compete. So I just, as a habit, want to mention that every time, just so that you know that there has been a more deep understanding since Hamilton's rule was introduced. Either way, population structure is one of the mechanisms that we naturally look at if we think of prisoner's dilemmas. The other one is repetition. So here you can imagine that if we play the same game, you can make your behavior, if we keep repeating the same game, you can make your behavior in the prisoner's dilemma contingent on what happened in the past, and thereby you can sort of force each other mutually into cooperation. And also here I'm assuming that many of you may know Axelrod's tournament, where Tit-for-Tat proved to be a very successful strategy. At the very end, I'll try to also come back to this, because Hamilton's rule and Tit-for-Tat are things that many of us understand, and there's also an appeal of just understanding that makes it successful in science in publication. But what I'm going to argue is that in explaining human cooperation, we are a bit overly optimistic about these two mechanisms. So partner choice is also a mechanism. So if we choose nice people to play with, that can be a force. And what I sometimes see in the literature, and which is really a very shallow analysis of what happens, is that the idea is that all these three mechanisms create assortment. So with population structure, if you sit next to someone else on a network, then you may descend from the same individuals, and therefore you are more similar. With repetition, the idea would be that if you play tit-for-tat, then the behavior of you and your opponent is going to be similar. and with partner choice that can also induce assortment. But I hope at the end of this talk to give a more complete overview of all possible mechanisms and a deeper description of the differences between them. Either way, the question that you could ask is, are we being good scientists about this? So it's very easy to, well, very easy, I don't know, but it's relatively easy to publish papers on population structure or repeated interactions, and we have published very many. But a good question is, how well does it describe our behavior? And that's where I want to be a bit more critical. So we have a large pile of theory papers, and we also have an enormous pile of empirics papers, but both sides very generally refer to the other side. So theory papers typically say, we know from experiments that people aren't all that selfish, and then people have pro-social tendencies, and now we're going to explore a possible explanation for that. The empirics papers are similarly global or not precise about theory. They say, well, here's a few possible mechanisms: population structure, repetition, here we're going to look at the properties and details of that pro-social behavior. But if we're being proper scientists, the way we tell our family that science works, then we would do testing of specific theories and look for predictions that those specific theories make and see if they hold up or if they're rejected by empirical evidence. So what my PhD student and I have done in the paper that is the most important source of what I'm sharing today is see if we can make a switchboard where we look at specific theories and connect them to the existing empirical evidence in the literature and see how well these predictions hold up. And then the result is actually very, very disappointing. And some of those, some of the broader things we'll see today, but the papers that underlie this presentation, they have a whole bunch of details that show that these links are many predictions don't hold up. And one of the things that a co-author of mine taught me is that if you're looking for an explanation for why we are moral, you can of course have like a menu of ingredients and look at things that are present in us. So we are moral and we interact repeatedly, or we are moral and we live in, or hunter-gatherers live in group structured populations. But, so this is my co-author. What she pointed out to me is that what you should also look at is, why is it us that are moral? Or in other words, you should, the quality of an explanation also hinges on whether immoral species don't have these ingredients, right? Or immoral species that are not moral like we are, if those don't have repetition, or if those don't have group structure. If that's the case, if we are moral and we have population structure, and other species are not moral like we and they don't have it, then that's a better explanation than if we are moral and others aren't, and both of us have a similar population structure. Now, what I'm going to argue is that we have been focusing on the wrong things here, and well, I'll come back to that in a second, but first, one of the points that we're going to make is that it's not a coincidence that morality evolved in the same species, in us, that also has delayed gratification. So we are patient in consumption. We have mental time travel. We can remember. We have episodic memory. We remember specific things from the past, and we can imagine different things in the future and counterfactuals for today. And we have theory of mind. Now, let me illustrate what I'm trying to say with some of my own work. And there's two reasons why I do this. This is a picture from one of my papers, where on the horizontal axis there is repetition. So in the left down corner, it's a one-shot game. In the right down corner, it's an infinitely repeated game. On the vertical axis, there is population structure or relatedness. So at the bottom, you have no population structure at all, or a well-mixed population. And at the middle, you would have a relatedness that is the same as relatedness between siblings. And at the top, you would have relatedness like between clones. And the aim of this theory was to have a unified theory of those two well-known ingredients, repetition and population structure. And we do have that theory. And what is really nice is that Hamilton's rule shows up on the vertical axis, and a result from economics about how repetition can stabilize cooperation shows up on the vertical axis. But then you also have the interior of the square, and this is all a unified theory, and the theoretical predictions really match very nicely with simulations, and everything's beautiful. So I'm proud of it. It's technically sound, and in that paper we finish with maybe the recipe for humans was this combination where you have a lot of repeated interactions and a tiny, a whiff of population structure, and that gets you over this phase transition where defecting stops being an equilibrium. Blah, 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 right? Now here's why this is not great. Because if you compare humans and chimps and gorillas, then they also live in groups. So they act repeatedly with their group members as we do. They see each other every day. And if there has been sequencing, and it has been shown that the relatedness within a group with hunter-gatherers is actually the same, more or less the same as with chimps, and both of those are slightly higher than gorillas. So according to my friend's criterion for how good an explanation this is actually not very good, because this doesn't explain the difference between humans and chimps, or between humans and gorillas, because both of us are in the same corner. So what I'm trying, so my answer to this, the second reason why I wanted to share this is that I'm not just throwing shade on other people's. I'm not being critical of other people's work. I'm being critical of my own work. This is work that I really, really love, and I have to admit it's not a great. It's not a great. It's an elegant theory, but it doesn't hold up to empirical evidence. Its prediction doesn't. So what's wrong here is that this idea is that we're playing the same games, or the basic idea for this explanation would be different species play the same game. We're all playing prisoner's dilemmas. And there may be a difference in repetition rate or relatedness, and that explains the differences between the species. And what I'm saying is that this is looking at the wrong possible solution, because our niche as humans is that we get our calories in a technological way. So we are a social, technological species. If you want to make a living as a human, that's very information intensive. You have to, hunt in spring for this, and then you have to remember to get roots from under the ground in autumn, and harvest the right things, and all of that is done with also with tools. Tools are stuff that you need to make. It's an investment in the future, and lots of those things are also done together. So given that we make a living in this relatively high technological way, that means we're not playing the same games as other species do. We play games with, for instance, a time component. If you build a boat for fishing, that takes time. It's an investment, and you have to do it together. And I think many of us have seen these norms for collective fishing, where or for whaling, where different parts of the whale are given to different contributions to the boat. So if you make the if you are using the harpoon, then you get this part of the fish, and if you make the sail, then you get this part of the fish. Well, that's just a way of illustrating that we play a different game, because now it becomes important with those games. We get new ways to be opportunistic, and so you could, for instance, not do your best, not do your part, and the fishing expedition could turn out badly because the person that was supposed to make this sail didn't do his or her job. And you could also, you could steal tools and sell them or exchange them with someone living in a nearby village. So there's all kinds of ways in which this technological way of making a living creates new games and new opportunities to be opportunistic. And morality is our suggestion, is an evolved way of dealing with those new games. And therefore, it's no coincidence that we also have theory of mind. We need to understand what the people that are building this boat with us think. We have to invest, we have delayed gratification, and all of that. Okay, now before we go to the explanation or the mechanism that we believe in, I would like to first do one last indication that what we write in our papers and the mechanisms that we tend to focus on mostly.
What is that then?
Yeah, sorry. Okay. So yeah, let me do that. So if we focus on population structure for a second, then population structure can be explicitly genetic. So we reproduce locally, and therefore, if I sit next to someone, they share the same genes. It could be explicitly cultural, so it could be about passing on ideas to others that live close by. And there's models that allow for both interpretations. Now, for explicitly genetic population structure, out of all of those introductions of those papers that are the same, one of the things that is also a standard ingredient there is, well, the thing that we're most surprised about is being altruistic or being moral towards those that are not genetically related to us. Being nice to your son, to your brother, to your sister, that we understand with Hamilton's rule, but it's being nice to people that don't share our genes, that's the mystery that we want to solve. And I agree with that, right? That's totally okay. what is typically not in those introductions is that you can say something very similar, or at least technically not similar, but as an argument equally strong about why our population structure models where transmission is social are also not cutting it. So for that, I would like to go back to this super stylized circle. I am fully aware that I am very familiar with this. So if I'm going too fast, please slow me down. So the circle has blue individuals and red individuals. The blue ones are the cooperators and the red ones are the defectors. And the idea is they play a prisoner's dilemma. Both with their left and with their right neighbor. So if you both defect, you get 0. If I defect, the other one cooperates, I get 3. If I cooperate, the other one defects, I get -1. And if both of us cooperate, we both get 2. So for those defectors that have a defector on the left and on the right, they get 2 zeros. And then the defectors on the boundary, they get 0 from this neighbor because that's a defector, but they get 3 from this neighbor because that's a cooperator. Now the cooperators on the boundary, they get -1 from interacting with this defector, but +2 for interacting with this neighbor that is a cooperator, and that adds up to 1. And then the cooperators in the middle, they get high payoffs. They get 2 from their interaction with their left neighbor and 2 from the interaction with their right neighbor. So this is a classic super stylized tool to form your intuition on how population structure works. Now, the idea is you can think of this as genetic, but you can very easily also think of this as social. So you could imagine that that individuals look at their left and right neighbor and use that information to update their strategy. Now, if this individual here that's between 2 cooperators updates their strategy, then they're just looking at, they don't have these defectors, they don't see any cooperator, so they keep doing the same. But those that are on the boundary, they have a neighbor that is a cooperator and a neighbor that's a defector, and then they could imitate. They could choose to imitate the cooperator because the cooperator gets a higher payoff than a defector, right? So because this cooperator gets a 1 and this defector on the other side gets a 0, they might choose to switch to cooperation. They can also look to neighbors further away. If they look to 2 neighbors on the left and 2 neighbors on the right, things look even better for switching to cooperation. Now, what I'm trying to say here is, what I'm trying to say here is, let me go back a little bit. This mechanism, so if population structure with cultural transmission works, it works because of this. Now, this requires that you don't really understand the game, right? So if you are a defector here and you were to understand the game, you would realize that if I switch to cooperation, then I would go from having a payoff of 3 to a payoff of 1. So looking at your neighbors is actually not a great not a great choice, not a good way to decide what would be in your best interest. A better way would be to look at the counterfactual, because after switching to cooperation, this actually gets a lower payoff. In other words, for this to work, what is required is that those that are updating in this way have a limited understanding of the game. So they don't understand that they should really look at the counterfactual. And that is not a good match with humans, because if we put humans in the lab, the reason why they cooperate is typically not that they don't really understand the consequences for how much money they take away from the lab. If they cooperate in a prisoner's dilemma, they know perfectly well that they give up some money, and but the upside of that is that their partner in the lab walks away with more. So summarizing, it's not only true that population structure doesn't match the behavior that we see, the nice behavior to genetically unrelated others, but also if you switch to the cultural transmission, then the behavior that we observe also doesn't match what the theory would predict. So yeah, it's really, population structure is really not a great theory for the evolution of human altruism or morality. Now, finally, we get to the thing that we do propose, and it's also not new at all. So we're really going with the suggestion by Robert Frank. It has been around since '88, and I should also say, I read the book earlier in my career. I found it fantastic, and yet I still went on the path of writing papers about repetition and population structure. So that's an observation that maybe at the end we can also discuss why that happens. But yeah, I do have to acknowledge that what this book suggests, explains human morality, is much more in line with the empirical evidence. So what I'm going to do in the remainder of this presentation is I'm just going to look at 4 games in which we can look at what commitment would do. And I hope to convince you that this lines up much more with the empirical evidence. So again, if I'm very familiar with the ultimatum game, but if you want to stop me, you might also do someone else a favor who is a bit shy. So don't hesitate to stop me if anything is unclear. So the ultimatum game is a game that does have a time component. First, the proposer makes a proposal, and the idea in this simple figure is there's 4 euros that fall from the sky, and the proposer can make one of 5 proposals: 4 for the responder, 3 for the responder, 1 for the proposal, and so all the way to all 4 for the proposer. The responder in turn has to have an answer ready for all of those proposals, and the answer can be yes or no. If it's yes, then whatever the proposal was is materializes, and if it's no, then both get nothing. Now, there are possible combinations of proposer behavior and responder behavior that you could think of as equilibria, or that you can think of as stable. And what I first want to do is think a little bit about evolutionary dynamics. So suppose we have a population, and all proposers propose the equal split, and all responders accept the equal split, and they accept it if they get more, but they don't accept if the responder would get only 1 or 0 in the proposal. Now, the responder doesn't want to deviate. It doesn't really matter if this answer changes or this answer changes, but what is important is that it does accept the equal split. If it would switch to not accepting the equal split, it would lose money. And the proposer is best off by proposing the equal split, because if it would propose less, it would be rejected and it wouldn't get anything. If it would propose more for the responder, it would be accepted, but then the proposer has less. Right? So this is the optimal thing to do for the proposer. Now, if you think of a world in which everybody makes a mistake every now and then you can look at what evolution should do here. So suppose everybody makes a mistake every once in a while. So sometimes this proposal comes along, and then the responder that rejects this would lose out. So you could imagine that there is, even if it's a little bit weak, but there is selection against rejecting this proposal. Now, if time has gone on for long enough and sufficiently many responders in the population switch to accepting this, now things change for the proposer, and the proposer would actually be best off by making this proposal in which the proposer gets 3 instead of 2, and this would be accepted. Now, of course, the proposal in which the proposer gets everything, it doesn't matter what the, either way, the responder gets nothing, so there's no selection here. But you could imagine that selection takes you to a place where all positive proposals, all proposals in which the responder gets anything are being accepted. And that is a stable Nash equilibrium. Now, this is not what we see in the lab, and how commitment could explain what we see in the lab is in the following way. Now, suppose we live in a population where some responders are irrational in the sense that they don't accept this proposal. That is bad for their payoff, but now imagine that the proposers can see, they can differentiate between responders that are committed to rejecting this proposal and responders that are not. Now, even though the behavior itself is bad for the responder, being committed to it and the proposer realizing that the responder is committed to this works to the advantage, because then those responders that are committed to rejecting are going to get a better deal. They're going to get a proposal in which they get more. Now, of course, it is crucial that there's communication between the two. There's information transmission so that proposers can tell the difference between responders that are and responders that are not committed to rejecting this proposal. So that is the mechanism. And I should say we have written a second paper that goes over all possible mechanisms for behavior for evolution of behavior in the ultimatum game, and there's no time here to discuss the fancy details, but it turns out that commitment lines up much better with the empirical evidence than the alternatives. So to emphasize how this mechanism works is the behavior itself, once you're rejecting, it is really still bad for fitness, but being committed to it is good for fitness, and more specifically, convincing the other that you're committed is the key. And part of Bob Frank's book is looks at this communication part, right? So so it's key that this communication happens, and we're, of course, that would mean that we would have to observe that the only way to the thing is, it doesn't even have to be the only way, but what is important is that there is some positive correlation between being committed and convincing the others that you are committed. So what the current, I don't know, consensus, but the majority position is, or the majority approach to the ultimatum game would be, we have models for the evolution of cooperation. These give us pro-social preferences, and those we take and misapply to games for which they haven't evolved. So then these models are typically models with prisoner's dilemmas. These give us pro-social preferences, for instance, inequity averse preferences, and those we take to games like the ultimatum game. And one thing in the paper, and if we have time at the end, I can go into more details, but one thing that we do in the paper is to point out why both of these arrows are problematic. So there's really no decent way to explain rejecting behavior in the ultimatum game with models of population structure and prisoner's dilemmas. Yeah, I don't know how tight-fisted I should be with time, but yeah. I'm happy to come back to the details of this if people are curious. Now here's a second game, the trust game. Also, that has a time component. So the truster, the idea is that the truster has, let's say, €3, and one option is to just keep it and do nothing with it. Another option is to give the €3 to the trustee, and then the trustee turns it into €6. Maybe the trustee has some technology or a smart investment for the €3 that the truster doesn't have access to. And then the trustee has to choose what to do with those €6. It can keep all 6. It can keep 2. It keeps 4 and send 2 back. It can keep 2 and send 4 back, and it can send all 6 back. Now, if you again look at the evolutionary dynamics without commitment, then the prediction is that selection is always going to select for trustees sending back ever less. So if the trustee doesn't send anything back to the truster, then the truster serves his or her own best interest by by keeping the €3. Now it is clear that there would be something to gain for both, because if the truster would send money and the trustee would send back 4, then both would be better off than in the current situation. Now here, commitment can also help out. So suppose that you are stupid enough or irrational enough to send back 4, then the truster would, if the truster sees this, the truster would be happy to send the 3 over, because it would get more, it would end up with more money than otherwise. Now, again, I would have to stress that this, of course, only works if trusters can tell the difference, right? Trusters have to understand, have to be able to tell apart trustees that wouldn't send back enough money and trustees that would. So again, rationally irrational behavior would be for the trustee to send back money. That's bad at the moment that you do it, but if you're committed to it, it's good for you because money will come your way. Now, a little detail that I want to go over with these two games is that the difference between those games are also interesting. So one pathway for commitment to work is that it can change the behavior of your existing partner, right? So in this game, if you're matched and you cannot change that, being a trustee can make your truster send you money and you'll be the better for it. If you turn this game in, and we have done so, to the who to trust game, so where the truster can pick between different trustees who to send money to or not to send money to either of them, then being committed also helps you for being chosen to play as a partner for this game. And in this game, if you include partner choice, then that would help the evolution of trustworthy behavior, or the irrational behavior of sending back money. Whereas if we go back to the ultimatum game, here it's different. So partner choice here would work the other way. So if you're matched to a partner and you can't pick a different one, then of course the responder can make its current partner change their behavior by rejecting, and then you get a better proposal. But if the proposer can pick between different responders, then partner choice would work against what we see in the lab, right? So partner choice would, you would always choose the partner that accepts the most. Yeah, so I wanted to include that in the reflection on the differences between those games. Yeah, if you are a game theorist, then it's nice, to think of this, that commitment changes the course of what game theorists call backward induction. But it's also, if you're not a game theorist, it is clear that for commitment to work, this also requires understanding of the game, and understanding and the ability to put yourself in the shoes of this other person. What would you do if you would have to choose between sending back money or not? Is a crucial ingredient for this to work. So there's two more games. One of them we came up with ourselves, and we don't really have a good name for it yet. That's the insurance game, or the friendship game. So here's how that works. There's two individuals, and there's two options. One of them is lucky, or the other one's lucky. So in this case, the player, one of the players gets 3 and the other player gets 0. And in this case, things are reversed. The fortunes are reversed. Now, the lucky player can decide to keep everything or can decide to share. And the reason why sharing leads to more payoffs in total than not sharing is that you can think of this as calories, or how much you benefit from additional calories depends on how much you've already eaten, right? So if you're really going hungry, then a little bit of extra food is really, really beneficial for your fitness. But if you have already eaten quite a bit, then an additional bunch of calories doesn't help as much. So by sharing, you help the person that doesn't have anything more than the person that gives away a little bit is losing. And the same thing for if the I don't know what the English expression is, the shoes on the other foot, or whatever, if the fortunes are reversed. So it's also clear here that there is scope for any pair that is playing this game to benefit. Because if you are in a situation where both of you would share, whoever is the lucky and the unlucky one, then you're guaranteed a payoff of 2. Whereas if you're in a pair where neither of the individuals share, then there's always one. The how much you're going to get on average is only 1.5. But of course, it's also clear that that if you ask yourself what selection would do without commitment, then it would select for you not to share, because 3 is more than 2, and why would you do that? So again, also here, without commitment, you would have selection for not sharing. But if there is a scope to communicate that you would share, then those that are committed to sharing could seek each other out, and they could form pairs in which they share. And then they would be better off than other individuals that aren't committed to sharing within the population. We call this hypothetical reciprocity. There's been someone that said maybe you should call it counterfactual reciprocity. And this is different from normal reciprocity, where I do something nice for you because you did something nice for me in the past. But this is, you would have done the same for me, and therefore I do it for you. And there's a fantastic example of this. So at the last Winter Olympics, in order to get to the Olympics for speed skating, in the US you have to go through trials, and it's only the first two that get sent to the Winter Olympics. And there was a speed skater. Oh man, I should have prepared a little bit better because I forgot her name, but she had won every race the whole season on the 500 meters. But on the trials, she made one misstep and she finished third. Now, a friend of hers had finished first. Well, I forgot, maybe first or second, but she finished. She would have a right to go to the Winter Olympics. And then she gave away her spot. So she gave away a spot to her friend. So I found it very moving, and she did it super graciously. And in the end, her friend did win gold at the Winter Olympics. And when she was interviewed, she was super gracious about it. They asked her, do you feel it's partly your medal? And she said, no, no, no. She deserves this gold medal because she's the best in the world. And, and when they asked, why did you do it? She did say exactly this. She would have done the same for me. And it's really not reciprocity, because the woman or the girl that gave away her spot was already too old for her to ever make it to the Winter Olympics in 4 years into the future. So there's no way in the world in which her friend could ever repay her. And we all understand this, right? We all, so it's not a sense. So this sentiment of hypothetical reciprocity is not something that we don't understand. Also, for instance, romantic couples, they care for each other in old age. Maybe it's me that loses my ability to walk. Maybe it's my partner, but we totally understand that whoever loses it first, the other one would have done the same for me, and therefore we be happy to do it for the other. And we also recognize the sentiment that if we feel that someone else wouldn't do the same for me, our willingness to do the same for the other person is also affected by that, right? So this sentiment of hypothetical reciprocity is we recognize this, and it's clear that this cannot be explained by repeated game models, and it can by commitment. So the last game I want to introduce a little bit by describing what's going on in parts of the literature. So one way to phrase the mystery is, why is there costly cooperation, right? Why do we cooperate in business dilemmas while it costs you? And one way to one possible answer is, well, maybe if people are punishing each other, it's not costly to cooperate, right? So if I live in a population where others are going to punish me for defecting, then it's actually not costly to cooperate. That changes the question into, of course, why is there costly punishment? And one idea in the literature is, well, you have this hierarchy where you can stabilize cooperation by punishment, by first order punishment, and then you could have higher orders of punishment. So if you fail to punish a cooperator, then you could be punished for that. And the idea here is that how this contributes to the evolution of cooperation is that cooperation is expensive, but punishment is not that expensive if everybody cooperates. So if we're in a state where everybody cooperates and everybody punishes, if someone would not cooperate, then it's not that costly because there aren't that many defectors to punish. And if you stack those higher order punishments, it gets ever cheaper to maintain that. And therefore, the idea is that then you only need a tiny bit of group selection to make it work. Now, there's a bunch of things to say about this. We don't really find second order punishment, for instance, in the lab, but we do find a bunch of first order punishment.
Matthijs,
yeah.
Hugo Pagano has a question, I think.
Oh, sorry. Yes.
Hugo?
No, at the end.
Okay. Well, okay, at the end is also fine. It's perfectly fine.
Hugo, you have a question?
At the end, Jeff, not now. I don't want
Okay.
to.
Yeah.
Thank you.
I was booking myself, sorry.
Oh, I see you. Oh, you booked then. Okay. Okay, Matthijs.
Very good. Very good. Okay, so what I'm saying is, if you combine the prisoner's dilemma with a punishment round, so first you play the prisoner's dilemma, you can choose cooperation or defection, and then there's a second round in which you can choose to punish or not to punish. If neither of the two punishes the other one, nothing happens. But if I choose to punish, I lose 1. From 0 to -1 or from -2 to -3. And if my partner goes from not punishing to punishing, I lose 2. So from 0 to -2 or from -2 to -3. Now, again, without commitment, you would expect defection to dominate cooperation and not punishment to dominate punishment, because both of those are costly. But what if you allow for individuals to be committed to punishment? Now, maybe first a little detail. So in the literature, even the labeling is not neutral as for the mechanisms that we are thinking of. So this is typically called altruistic punishment because the idea here is that the reason why punishment happens is to teach a defector a lesson so that the next individual that meets this person is going to see better behavior. And this is partly inspired because most of the experiments we do in the lab don't allow for the pathway of commitment to materialize. What I'm saying is, with commitment, the possible mechanism is not that punishment is there to teach the person a lesson for the next person that meets this person. No, I might be committed to punishment to deter my partner from defecting on me. So the idea being, if I am committed to punishing my partner, if my partner understands that I am committed to punishment, my partner is going to choose to cooperate with me and not defect. So the benefit of being committed to punishment is on me, not on the next person that my partner interacts with, because I could deter my partner from defecting on me. And again, of course, as always, for this to work, there has to be communication, right? If people don't see that I'm committed to punishment, I can't benefit from it because my partner won't be able to give me better treatment than those that are not committed. So there's a bunch of things in the literature that with this we understand much better. So a famous paper in Nature is about parochial altruism, but really what's a better word for this would be parochial punishment. And what happens in this paper is that there are three individuals, person A, person B, and person C. Person A can choose to be nice to person B or not nice to person B. And person C can then take what person A did into consideration and use that as information for punishing A or not punishing A. Now, so what happens in this graph is that they have experiments where B and C are from the same tribe, or A, B, and C are from the same tribe, or A and C, or A and B, and whoever's not there here is from a different tribe. Now, if the punishment was there to teach your group members a lesson, then what we would expect is that we see, first of all, of course, punishment when all three are part of the same tribe, but maybe also when the agent and the one who judges the behavior are from the same tribe, right? That could maybe not as much as here, but out of the three other alternatives, that's where you would expect most of the punishment to happen if it's about teaching your group members a lesson. However, that's not what we see. What we see here is that what's grouped together is cases where the recipient and the one who judges are from the same tribe. And if we understand punishing with commitment, that makes total sense. We're not teaching this person a lesson for his or her next interaction. We're trying to we're committed to protecting our group members. So it's the membership of the passive party here that you can transgress on that matters, and not the group membership of the agent. So, you know, this is not discussed in this paper because this paper tests something else, but the outcome of this experiment does make total sense if you understand punishing with commitment, and not if you don't. And there's another famous paper. It's called "Winners Don't Punish." It's a paper that there's a whole, there's many ways in which you can be critical of the paper, but I don't want to. That's not relevant. So I won't discuss the paper itself or what it tries to test, but as a side product of this paper, we can look at the data that it finds, and here's what the paper has as treatments. It has a repeated prisoner's dilemma where you can play cooperate or defect, and what makes it really interesting is that other subjects in the lab have a third option. You could call it the nuclear option or whatever you want to call it, or they call it punishment. And what this third option does is for yourself, it's more costly than defection. Actually, defection is not costly to yourself, right? If you defect instead of cooperate, you get more points. And if you punish instead of defection, then you get less points, right? 1 is less than 3, -2 is less than 0, -5 is less than -3. But the effect of this nuclear option on your partner is much more detrimental than just playing defect instead of cooperate. So your partner loses an additional 3 points, -5 instead of -2, -3 instead of 0, or -5 instead of -2. Now, if you think what evolution would do to this third option, then there's really no reason that anyone would ever use that option, because you don't need it to discipline your partner, and it's only costly to yourself. Now, funny thing, a lot of people in the lab actually do use this nuclear option. So that is surprising, and the majority in this field has a strong belief that we have learned our reciprocity in repeated games. It has evolved in repeated games, and it sort of spills over into our behavior in one-shot games. But this might be an indication, and I think it is an indication, that there's actually some traffic in the other direction. So maybe our punishment behavior in repeated games is a spillover from how we learn to behave in one-shot games, like the Prisoner's Dilemma with a punishment option. So I think that I should slowly finish, maybe, or are we right? Or yeah. So there's a bunch of things that we can still talk about, but let me finish. So at the beginning, I pointed to the importance of comparing us to other species if we want to explain human morality. And I hope that I've convinced you that the difference between us and other species is not so much that we play the same games but with different repetition rates or different group structure or different population structure, but that we are earning our living in a different way, in a technological way, and therefore we play different games with problems that other species don't have, and our morality solves those. So it's not a coincidence that we also have theory of mind and all of the other mental capacities that are also needed in those games. So commitment itself, commitment, the explanation with commitment lines up better with the empirical evidence. So there's lots of the details of the behavior that we observe in the lab are much more in line with what you would expect if it's explained by commitment, and also the cross-species evidence lines up much more with a commitment explanation. So I promised a little bit of an overview. So I'm not saying that population structure doesn't matter. Also not saying that repetition doesn't matter. These are proper different mechanisms. When comparing the ultimatum game and the trust game, I pointed to that commitment. It always has an effect on the behavior of others, but it can be either an effect on my existing partner, or it can make people choose me, and both of those are effects on other individuals. And I haven't come to another possibility, which I don't think is a strong contender for human altruism, but it could be a byproduct of costly signaling. And I do want to stress that communication, both at mechanism 3 and 4, is going to be an issue. The last thing that I want to say is that thinking of commitment as an explanation also opens the door to understanding a whole bunch of aspects of our morality for which thinking of population structure and prison dilemmas doesn't help. Empathy, sure, but responsibility, for instance, is something that I have my task. I'm responsible for my part of the job and not for yours, and that is really different from just generally caring about the end result or about the well-being of others. And honesty, for instance, is something we don't really understand why we would care so much for honesty if we have population structure or repetition, but we do if honesty is a commitment to truth-telling or being trustworthy. And also another, I can't stop being enthusiastic about this. It will be the last thing that I say, but commitment doesn't just explain the rosy sides of our behavior. It also explains a bunch of bad stuff. well, I shouldn't really finish, but yeah, I think human morality does not make sense except in the light of commitment. And here's my co-authors on different projects related to it, Asle and Stefan and Schalch and Christopher. And I didn't talk about a project about communication in ultimatum games, but those are my friends or my colleagues that we did that with. So yeah, love, peace, and understanding.
Thanks very much indeed, Matthijs. I wasn't aware of this, how one would introduce commitment into a game theoretic approach and how much it transforms the issues. So that was very enlightening. So I'll ask Hugo, who's had his hand up for some time.
Yes.
Yeah.
Can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Yes.
Okay. I think that is a fantastic paper, and really this role of commitment in game theory is really beautiful. Really, congratulations. Now, my problem is really with chimps, gorillas, and humans.
Yeah.
Why? Because in a way, still we do not have a clear answer why we evolved this commitment and they did not. And I try to give an answer in a paper to this question. Jeff knows the paper very well because you know, he commented it in another paper that was written, Sex in the Brain. Why? Because it's all about sexual selection. Why? Because you need, at a certain point, a selection mechanism such that the ones that show commitment are able to do better than the others. Okay? And you can get it if you get a different fertility system. So if you get a fertility system like chimps, you know, in which just insemination capacity matters, you know, and you try to have a game of insemination, you don't need commitment, okay? And if you try to have the territory like the gorilla, you do not need commitment. But if you get concealed ovulation, the only way in which you can basically be sure that you are transmitting your genes is through some form of commitment and deal. Okay, so commitment and deal, showing commitment, appreciating commitment, and so on, finds the explanation in a different fertility system. Then the question becomes, how did it happen that we got this almost unique fertility system? Because most species advertise a lot, you know, for the fertility signals. We are almost unique in not advertising. And that is an interesting story because really gorillas start being an exception because they have a weak signal, okay? And the weak signal means that they can have a control of territory, and thanks to the weak signal, they basically can have a harem. But then the contradiction within the harem implied that the one that tried to become seductive, instead of being mechanically advertising, you may do better. And then you get at a point that is a big discontinuity where you get concealed ovulation. When you get concealed ovulation, then commitment matters, and you get some transmission mechanism, some genetic mechanism by which, you know, you evolve commitment. But you need these things because otherwise the problem is that you end up not understanding, if you do not refer to the second Darwin, the Darwin of the second book, that the one that broke with Wallace and was about sexual selection, I think that there is no way to discriminate between us and gorillas and chimps, on the other hand.
Thank you.
Yes, so I'm not sure how I can respond to this. So it sounds fantastically interesting. So maybe I can ask you a few questions. so the commitment that you're pointing to here, is that the commitment to your romantic partner, or to the partner that you're
Yes, you have to show commitment, and the commitment is somehow that you will trust that that person that has got consideration. So it's not a weak signal that you can control very well. Then it does not stay with others. So you need this type of commitment.
Okay.
And you said the person that then in exchange wants commitment that you help. You know, this is giving that person some bargaining power. And then that person wants commitment that after that you will help. And once she is pregnant, you do not run away, for instance. And so it becomes, you know, a selection mechanism where a commitment matters. So in fact, you were in fact even mentioning the most interesting and beautiful example that you gave was about old age, you know. And that type of commitment is really the basic thing, you know. Love is human love. I don't want to be too romantic, but human love is the whole thing, you know, by which the whole story starts, and we become fundamentally different.
There's a few things, you know, I have a limited knowledge of mating systems in primates. There's a few things that I can say. So one is I should be more modest than I was in my presentation about the friendship game. We did invent the friendship game, but there is something in the literature that shares a lot of features with it. And that is, I forgot the name of the authors, but I'm sure we refer to them in the paper. And that is that if you are a committed pair, then being nice or saving the other is actually the right thing to do, because then you keep the person alive that is committed to saving you. So that's a sort of self-reinforcement once you're there. And that's not our idea, but that's an existing idea. So if you can send me your papers, because I find mating systems super interesting. So I'm sure I didn't catch the deeper details of and I would like to read the papers. So the way that I tend to think about human romantic commitment is that this also is related to the way we make a living, because the marginal contribution of the other parent in the investment in the child is, so if we have so species that are monogamous, again, this I learned from my biology friends. One famous example is the emperor penguin. If they leave their egg unattended, it's freezing. So there always needs to be someone on the egg, and therefore, if you're not committed to your partner, if you're not monogamous and you both take care of the egg, you don't have successful offspring. And what I learned so there's a famous, March of the Penguins, a famous movie. And what I learned here at the biology department is that there's actually a desert counterpart of this. So there's a larch, I think, in the Arabian Peninsula, that if they leave their eggs unattended, it fries. So they are also equally monogamous. And for humans, since we invest so much per child to raise them to be, we need to invest. Also, hunter-gatherers invest in their children up to the age of 18. They have a gap between the calories that they produce and the calories that they consume, and that means that the marginal contribution of the second parent for the success of the child is much higher for us than it is for chimpanzees, because the total investment in the child required to make a successful human child is much more than for a chimp, and therefore you start having commitment problems. You want to be sure that your partner keeps investing over the 18 years that you do your child rearing. And that's how I tend to think why humans fall in love. But do send me the papers because I'm super interested. But I do also, the other thing that I would like to say is that when I talk about commitment, I don't mean romantic commitment. I mean commitment that we also have in our non-romantic interactions, like feeling ashamed to, when you lie, or feeling uncomfortable to leave someone else to do all the work, or feeling uncomfortable if you didn't do your part of the job. Yeah. Yeah, I'm not saying that there is definitely overlap in romantic and non-romantic commitment.
No,
yeah.
I don't put it in.
Can I ask Sarah Khan? We've got limited time now.
Yeah.
Sarah
Hi.
Khan?
Yeah, sorry. I really enjoyed that talk. Thank you. So my question was sort of about the scope of commitment for you, because I think there's a couple different types of commitment, and I'm not sure one of them is really in opposition to population structure and repetition. So you could think of commitments where it's the sender's action, the sender of the commitment signal's action, that changes their incentives to follow through on some future course of action. And that's sort of the way that you characterize commitment when you were talking about the trust game. So it's something about a feature of the agent that signals that they're going to do something in particular in some future course of action. So it's similar to Schelling's like tearing off the steering wheel.
Yeah.
Or you could think about commitment as what changes the committer's incentives is actually the reputational consequences that they would face for not following through on some signaled action.
Yeah.
And that's something both Schelling and Frank talk about as well. But if it's the latter, then commitment seems like a form of positive assortment, right? Partner choice becomes really important because it's all hinging on your reputation, and the whole population structure and repeated interaction, those become a really important part for sustaining cooperation. So it's true that commitment can ensure cooperation in one-shot games in the sort of first way that I mentioned, but it also can secure cooperation in repeated games, and maybe that's just a virtue. But is that what's the sort of scope of commitment for you in the context of those two sorts of ways of thinking about it? And is it bad or good that it also ensures cooperation via repeated interaction in populations?
Yeah. This is this is great, right? So I wrote down a few things. So just a total side remark. So Schelling is so Robert Frank keeps referring, and rightly so, to Schelling for the understanding of commitment. So I'm very happy that you brought that up. So I totally agree that so the analogy that I tend to use about evolution is the evolution of the mouth, right? If you would look at the mouth, it has acquired a bunch of functions, right? Originally, it was only there to put food in efficiently, but once it's there, you can use it for communication. You can make sounds with it. Other species do it with their wings, but it's there already, so you can add on functions to it. And if I think so, what I'm not trying to say is everything else is unimportant, and really the only answer is commitment. And what you're saying, or what I think you're saying, is you can have interesting interactions once you put different ingredients in the mix. Mm-hmm. And I totally agree with you, and I thank you for bringing that up, because that's I also think of it like that. I would though want to prevent us from making shallow analogies. So at the beginning, I pointed to what I think is a shallow analogy, that everything is basically ways to get assortment, right? It's not wrong, but it sort of turns a blind eye to the fact that population structure and repetition are really different animals. So I would also like to emphasize that commitment is not just a way. I'm not saying, so like in the friendship game, it's going to it's only going to work if committed people assort, right? So I'm not turning a blind eye to the fact that assortment may happen there, but in order to sort of a litmus test for whether commitment is involved or not would be if anyone is doing anything at some point that wouldn't be against their selective interests. So you don't need to be committed to cooperation if the mechanism is population structure. If you want to defect, be my guest, you're going to be selected away. So everybody who cooperates is cooperating because selection works for cooperation. In a population of tit-for-tat, if you want to play all D, go right ahead and you will lose selection. The thing with commitment is you only need to be committed if without commitment you wouldn't do it, right? And that's also why with commitment, it's something that I didn't touch on, you would expect much more heterogeneity, because you have this cycle where if there is commitment, the door is open for fakers, and therefore there will always be heterogeneity, and therefore there is always the need for signaling to tell fakers and committed individuals apart. And the interests of the different parties in getting the communication working don't align, right? And that's why you keep being in conflict. It remains an endless tug of war. I'm not sure, I'm sort of freestyling a little bit in connection to your question, but did I miss something that I should have answered?
No, I think you've sort of answered it, that there is an interaction between all of these things.
Yeah. So I'm not saying that there aren't interactions. There are interactions, and sometimes it's also an overlap of between different properties of or similar properties of different mechanisms. But what I'm trying to do is try to look at so sometimes people also say, no, not people also say there are papers where what is presented as the mechanism is, for instance, reputation, right? And what I'm saying is reputation is one pathway to make communication work, and communication is essential, or sharing of information, and that is essential to make commitment work. But the mechanism is commitment. It's just that that reputation is one of different ways to make the necessary condition work, and that is that some information needs to flow.
Mm-hmm. Thank you.
Yeah. Oh,
thank you. You're on mute, Jeff. You're on mute.
Jeff, we can't hear you.
Jeff, we can't hear you. You're on mute.
Beg your pardon, I was mute. I'll try and do that again. I want to thank Matthijs very much for an excellent talk, a really stimulating piece. And I will like to finish by pointing out that the Darwin Club and its new series of talks welcomes new attendees, and we also welcome new members. So if anyone's interested in becoming part of our group and engaging in future events, please let Brian or myself know. So thanks again, Matthijs. The talk was really, really interesting. I learned a lot from it. I'm sure everybody else did. So thank you again, and goodbye, everyone.
Very happy to do it.
Thanks, Matthijs. Bye-bye.